What's up, YouTube? It's JackalGoldKick, and I'm here with Dynasty Heroes in Exlenninum. And we're going to be doing a video collaboration talking about our top 10 Resident Evil characters. So, Resident Evil is a game series that I am a fan of. Let's get right into this collaboration. I'm going to get into my top 10 Resident Evil characters. So, my number 10 choice is going to be Heisenberg from Resident Evil Village, aka Resident Evil 8. I thought Heisenberg was a really cool character, a really good villain. I think he was the best villain in Resident Evil Village. I think he should have been the main villain of that game, honestly. I think he has a really cool character design. I love his voice actor. I like how his ability was that he could control magnets and metals with his hands, basically, much like Magneto from X-Men. I thought he was just a really cool character in Resident Evil Village. He had that huge hammer he would wield, and I thought it was interesting how when you get to his factory as Ethan, he actually offers Ethan to join him at first to work together to take down Mother Miranda. I think it would have been interesting had that happened, or if there was like a choice where you actually could join him and take down Mother Miranda, because he was talking to Ethan about how your daughter has all these powers, and Heisenberg didn't really care for being an underling to Mother Miranda and working for her and being a part of her as one of the four lords. He wanted to take her down, and his factory was a pretty cool area. All the soldats he would work on, those were pretty cool enemies. And yeah, his boss fight was pretty cool as well, and he was a great character. So that's my number 10 choice, Heisenberg from Resident Evil Village, aka Resident Evil 8. It would have been interesting to see him in more games had he lived, and like I said, it would have been interesting if you could have joined him as an alternate path in Resident Evil Village to see how that would have went exactly. So my number 9 choice is going to be Luis Serra, both from Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Remake. Luis Serra is a great character. I like him in both versions. I think he has a great character design in both RE4 versions, great voice actor, and I think he's a really cool character. In the original Resident Evil 4, I really liked Luis Serra. I liked the part in the cabin section where him and Leon's teaming up fighting against Ganados. That's a classic part. Challenging too. And a lot of games have tried to emulate that from Resident Evil 4. I also thought it was interesting how if you shoot Luis too many times in the original, he'll kill you, and there's a special cutscene. Unfortunately, that wasn't in the remake, but I thought that was a nice touch in the original RE4. I liked his back and forth and chemistry with Leon when he gets rescued and he says the big cheese, referring to the Chief Mendez of the village, the leader of the Ganados in that area. And he had a death scene in the original by Sadler. Sadler killed him, and Leon had a pretty good reaction to his death, screaming his name. I actually prefer Leon's reaction to his death compared to the remake. I feel like there was more emotion there, if that made sense. And what made him interesting is he knew a whole lot about what was going on. You read all these notes and files later on that he's telling you about these enemies and what these creatures are, because he was a researcher hired by Sadler. He worked with him and he wanted to stop him. And he was trying to get the sample as well. He was also working with Ada. You get to see him in separate ways in the original RE4 as well. So he's a very interesting character, has a dynamic with Leon and Ada. And he was great in the original, had some good humor to him, and he was an awesome character. And fun fact with the original RE4, when they made Dead Rising 1, when they made that character Carlito Keys, the villain, they actually based him off of Luis. So that's pretty cool. And I also liked Luis Serra in Resident Evil 4 Remake. I feel like this isn't mentioned enough whenever people talk about Resident Evil 4 Remake, but I feel like they did an amazing job with Luis Serra in Resident Evil 4 Remake, and it's not mentioned enough in my opinion. He gets way more screen time. He shows up on a lot of the intercom parts where Leon's talking to somebody, so that's pretty cool. He has his moments in there, much like how he did in the original, but I feel like they did a lot more with him, where he's not just someone that worked with Sadler. He also used to be a part of Umbrella, which is interesting. And then, of course, in both games, he has the cool Red 9 pistol, really cool gun. It's cool that in Resident Evil 4 Remake, they actually finally make him playable. He's playable in Mercenaries, which is really cool. And he has some cool dynamic and chemistry with Ada in separate ways, as well as Leon in the main campaign. And I liked what they did with him in the Resident Evil 4 Remake. I also liked that new section they put in 4 Remake with him, where they took that section from the original where you go underground to the castle where the Lost Plagas and bugs were dug up, And instead of that section just being by yourself like the original, you actually get to go through it with Luis instead. And I thought that was cool. And he gets to live longer in the remake, which I thought was awesome. By the time he dies, it's kind of near the end of the castle, whereas in the original RE4, he dies around like the beginning of the castle or middle section. So I'm glad they let him stay around longer. I do wish he lived though, because he was a really cool character. And what I liked about Luis Serra in the Resident Evil 4 remake is he felt bad about helping Sadler and bringing this Ganado Las Plagas stuff to life, and working with Umbrella, and he wanted to right the wrongs of the past and be a good guy and help out Leon and help out Ashley and help out Ada. And in the remake, he was actually killed by Jack Krauser, not Sadler, which does make sense because Krauser works for Sadler, so he would have Krauser take out Luis. And I feel like that does make more sense than Sadler taking him out himself. And you get a final cutscene with him after you fight Krauser, and it's pretty sad. It definitely made me cry. I think it's a sad video game character death. It definitely made me cry. I think it was definitely more emotional than his death in the original, because he was just a, you know, guy trying to do the right thing, basically. And especially the part he says near the end when he dies that, people can change, right? And Leon just dies. That was definitely the most emotional part of his death, because it was just, sad when he said that, because he died when he said that. And it just, I feel like it, I just, what he said there, it did make me cry. And I thought his death was sad. I mean, Leon does care that he dies, but I wish his reaction was more like the original 4, where he was screaming his name, because I think it would have just been more impactful. Um, Now, what I will say is Leon's dynamic and interactions, I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of them with Luis, because he's a lot more serious with him. He's not as joking. Like this one guy said in the review, he feels more like Chris when he interacts with Luis. I definitely prefer Leon's interactions with Luis in the original, because Luis has a humorous side in both versions, but Leon has one in the original. Whereas in the remake, you don't have that as much of Luis, which I didn't understand that. I think they could have did that better, his interactions with Luis. And then in separate ways, the campaign, it was great what they did with him in 4 remake. You got a lot of screen time in that, working with Ada, and then trying to help Ada by creating that suppressant for her being infected, as well as trying to get that suppressant for Leon and Ashley. I do wish we could have gotten a final moment with Ada and Luis, because Ada shows up when he's dying and just goes after Krauser. And I feel like they should have had a moment where she gets to talk to Luis one last time or something. I think they could have did something like that. But yeah, Luis was a great character. That's my number 9 choice. Luis Serra, awesome character in both the original Resident Evil 4 and the remake. So number 8 choice is going to be Osman Sadler from the original Resident Evil 4. Not counting his Resident Evil 4 remake version, which I don't like, which I'll get to. Osman Sadler was a really cool villain in the original Resident Evil 4. I definitely liked him. I thought he had a really cool voice actor. I thought he had an awesome character design. I thought he was one of the better villains in the Resident Evil game series besides Wesker. I love his back and forth with Leon on the intercom parts where they're talking on that radio thing, the cut scenes with him. He had a lot of great dialogue, especially near the end when he's like, "This is just a cliche that happens in your Hollywood movies," and stuff like that. You just get great back and forth with him and Leon. He's such a cool villain. I like how he controls his cult and this Las Plagas, and he controls stuff with his hand when people are infected, like Leon and Ashley. And he's just such a cool villain. His boss fight is great. His boss design is great. I also love his music that plays when you fight him. It is incredible. It's one of my favorite Resident Evil songs, and one I think the best song from Resident Evil 4, the original. Love the music that plays. He's just a great villain. Takes out Mike, takes out Luis Serra, and it just creates this hatred from Leon to want to take Sadler down. So yeah, he was a really cool character. I liked Osman Sadler, and it was cool how he had Salazar working for him, and Torres Mendez, aka the village chief Big Cheese, working for him. I also think that the boss fight with him in separate ways in the original was pretty damn scary, where you fight him in the lab in his base form. He was pretty scary to fight, because not only does he take a while to take down an Ada's campaign, but he goes like this. He can zoom, or not zoom, but he like dashes all the way up to your face, like really quickly, and it's pretty scary. So I love his fight in separate ways. Pretty creepy fight. Now, in the Resident Evil 4 remake, Sadler fucking sucks, in my opinion. They butchered Sadler. I think that's one of the weak parts of Resident Evil 4 remake. I fucking hate Sadler in the Resident Evil 4 remake. I hate his design, where when his hoodie comes off, it's like the infection and he's bald. It's like I prefer when he had the slicked back type hair in the original. I don't like his voice actor. He's barely in the fucking remake compared to the original, and he's a lot more serious. None of that fun, crazy dialogue from the original. Not as much back and forth with him and Leon, and he's barely in the fucking game. And yeah, I just thought Sadler was terrible in the remake. I thought they did a terrible job with him, in my opinion, but I still love him in the original Resident Evil 4. So that's my number 8 choice, Osman Sadler. My number 7 choice is going to be Barry Burton. Barry Burton is a great character in the Resident Evil game series. He has a really cool character design. He's had really cool voice actors. He has the badass Magnum, Barry's Magnum, really cool gun. He was in Resident Evil 1, the original and the remake. He was great in those, had great dialogue that's quoted a lot. He was also in one of the endings of the original Resident Evil 3. Sadly, he wasn't in 3 remake at all. He was also on Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries, where he had Lu Bu's voice actor, which was fucking awesome. Jameson Price. He did a great job voicing Barry. He was fun to use in Mercenaries and RE5. He had that great Samurai Edge pistol. And then he was great in Resident Evil Revelations 2. I really enjoyed Resident Evil Revelations 2. I think that's one of the best Resident Evil games. And Barry Burton was awesome in that game. I enjoyed his sections in the campaign. It was awesome that he finally got to be playable in a Resident Evil campaign. And I thought it was cool how in Revelations 2, he had the same voice actor as Zhang Liao from Dynasty Warriors 5 and 6. Well, not 6, but Dynasty Warriors 5 to be exact. And yeah, Barry Burton's just a cool character, had cool dynamic and chemistry with Jill, had cool dynamic with Claire and Revelations 2, is, you know, the stuff going on with his daughter Moira, some of the backstory there. And he's just, Barry Burton's just a cool character overall. He knew Joseph Kendo and was able to supply Stars with guns. He also knew Chris before Stars, I believe. He was just a really cool character and pretty badass and awesome. Cool design, cool voice actors, and he always just had really cool dialogue and awesome things to say. So that's my number 7 choice, Barry Burton. My number 6 choice is going to be Claire Redfield. Claire Redfield is a great female character in the Resident Evil series. Really like her a lot. She has cool character designs, cool voice actors. I liked her in the original RE2. I liked her in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Her dynamic with Sherry. The stuff going on with Annette. Badass. She's a badass female character. She's the brother, or not brother. She's the sister of Chris Redfield. And, you know, she was also in Code Veronica. She was good in that. She was also in Revelations 2. I liked her in that as well in the campaign, playing as her. And I also liked her in the animated Resident Evil stuff. Even though I feel like she didn't get to do a whole lot in Infinite Darkness, I did like her in there. I also liked her in the live-action Resident Evil movies by Paul W.S. Anderson. I thought Ali Larter did a great job playing Claire Redfield in those movies. So yeah, I think she's a really good character and an awesome female character in the Resident Evil series. I do like her. So that's my number 6 choice, Claire Redfield. She also had a really cool dynamic with Leon in RE2 and the remake. So that was another cool thing about her chemistry with him. Her dynamic with her brother in Code Veronica was cool. Dynamic with Moira in Revelations 2, as well as Barry. You know, the stuff going on with Neil, the stuff going on with Steve in Code Veronica. So yeah, that's my number 6 choice, Claire. She's a really good character. My number 5 choice is going to be Ada Wong. Ada Wong is a great character from the Resident Evil game series. She's personally my favorite female character from the Resident Evil series. I like her a lot. I liked her character designs. I liked most of her voice actors except for RE4 Remake. She was great in Resident Evil 2, the original. She was great in RE2 Remake. She was great in Resident Evil 4, the original. I also liked her in Resident Evil 6. And she mostly always had good voice actors, good character design. She had cool dynamic and chemistry with Leon in Part 2 and the remake and Part 4 and RE6 as well. She was also good in the animated Resident Evil movie. I believe it's called Degeneration, where they're in Russia. She was great in there as well. And she's just a really cool character, badass female character. I like how she's like a behind the scenes type character where you get to see things behind the scenes from her point of view. And she's kind of like an anti-hero. You don't know if she's 100% a good person or 100% a bad person, because she is a mercenary that wants to go for the sample in RE2 originally and remake for money. And then in RE4, she's kind of going for that. But in the remake, they actually change it where she doesn't take it back to Wesker and decides to reroute the course in the helicopter. Now, in Resident Evil 4 Remake, I do like Separate Ways. I think they did a great job with it, with the stuff they did in it. Ada was, it was fun to play as her in the game, and she had cool dynamic with Luis. She also had cool dynamic with Luis in the original, but I'm not really a fan of Ada Wong in the Resident Evil 4 Remake. I didn't think they did a good job with her. The dynamic with her and Leon just felt off. It didn't feel like the right dynamic and chemistry that we get with Leon and Ada. And I think a lot of that has to do with her voice actress in Resident Evil 4 Remake. I don't think she had a good voice actress in RE4 Remake. It was not good at all. I don't know why they didn't stick with her voice actress from Resident Evil 2 Remake. She was great. I don't know why they changed it. Whoever they got in the RE4 remake was not a good Ada. They need to get rid of that voice actress if they ever bring her back, or have her improve her ability to voice act, because she was not good as Ada at all. Not enough range in her voice acting, and it just wasn't a good choice for Ada, and it made the character fall flat. But I did like her redesign in 4 remake. I thought it was really cool looking. And, she was great in the original RE4, chemistry with Leon, working for Wesker. That was pretty cool. She get to see Wesker, and her back and forth with Krauser was pretty cool in the original. When Krauser says, if it isn't the pitch in the red dress. Separate Ways with her was great. Playing as her in the Mercenaries was great. And, it was great to play as in the Mercenaries in 4 Remake as well. And it was interesting that she had that Wesker thing as well in 4 Remake, Separate Ways. And what they did with Wesker was pretty cool. I was disappointed, though, that there was no Krauser boss fight in Resident Evil 4 Remake. I don't know why they didn't do that. I really wish they would have. I think that was a missed opportunity. But yeah, I like Ada Wong overall. Definitely my favorite female Resident Evil character. And, I think her and Leon have always had an interesting dynamic where they like each other and help each other out. But Leon's more on the end of a good person, whereas Ada, you don't know if she's 100% a good person or 100% a bad person. It's kind of an anti-hero, I would argue, and behind-the-scenes type character. So that's my number 5 choice, Ada Wong. Number 4 choice is going to be Chris Redfield. Chris Redfield is a badass character from the Resident Evil game series. Really love Chris. He has cool character designs, really cool voice actor. He's a badass character. He was great in the original RE1. He was great in Resident Evil 1 Remake. He was awesome in Code Veronica. He was awesome in Resident Evil 5. He was, good in Resident Evil 6. He was awesome in RE7. It was cool to play as him and not a hero. He was really cool in Resident Evil 8. It was awesome to play as him in that. Though I did think it was a little bad with some of the story in Village, where he doesn't tell Ethan what's really going on, even though he had plenty of time to do so. I thought that was fucking stupid. He was great in Revelations 1 as well. And, he has a cool dynamic with Jill Valentine in the games they're in together, with Sheva, his rival stuff, and back and forth with, I don't know if I could say they're rivals, but, the back and forth with Chris and Wesker was really cool, where it's like personal, but it's also doing his job, going after Wesker, taking him down, as Wesker was a leader of the STARS unit, and Chris has hatred for him. And they have that through the whole series till Chris takes him out in part 5. And he had a cool dynamic with Rebecca as well in Resident Evil 1 and the remake, Rebecca Chambers. And, like I said, cool dynamic with Jill, Sheva, cool dynamic with his sister Claire in Resident Evil Code Veronica. I also really liked him in Resident Evil Vendetta. That's personally my favorite animated Resident Evil movie, because you have Leon, you have Chris, and you have Rebecca in there. And Chris is just a badass character, awesome character, gets the job done, badass soldier, kicks ass, takes names. And when you play as him, you feel like a badass. Like if you play Resident Evil 7, not a hero, you play as him in Resident Evil Village, you just feel like an absolute badass. And he's there, and I like how he's serious, and he's just there to get the job done and just get down to it, basically. And he was also good in Revelations 1. So yeah, that's my number 4 choice, Chris Redfield. Really cool character. So number 3 choice is going to be Jack Krauser. Jack Krauser is an awesome character from the Resident Evil game series. Love him in Resident Evil 4 and the remake. He's just such a cool character. I love Krauser's designs. I always like how he wore that military beret. That's got to be my favorite type of military clothing is the beret. I just think that looks really cool. I like how he has war paint in both versions. I like how he has this back and forth and dynamic with Leon where he knew him. You know, if you look at Darkside Chronicles, Operation Javier, they actually knew each other. And, in both versions of 4, they have a reunion. He's a pretty good rival to Leon. He has that badass big knife that looks really cool in both versions. Loved Krauser in the original RE4. I like how he works for Wesker as well as Ada. And him and Ada have back and forth. You know, he had the classic line calling Ada the bitch in the red dress. And his boss fight in the original Resident Evil 4 was really good. It was very challenging and professional. He has the badass crossbow explosive bolt. I thought he also had a pretty cool move in the Mercenaries of the original RE4 where he does the double kick if you flash grenade Ganados. His voice actor is so fucking cool in the original RE4. He's just badass. And, his stuff in separate ways. The boss fight where he actually comes back after Leon's fight in separate ways in the original RE4 was cool. I also liked him in Resident Evil 4 Remake. They changed him in there. Instead of working for Wesker, he's actually just, an ally of Sadler and wants to, have power and also revenge because you find out through files and notes that the government basically covered up what they did in Operation Javier, which was wipe out the unit that was with Jack Krauser. So the government betrayed their own people they sent in to go after cartels. Krauser is mad about that, but he also saw a thing of like becoming a villain and it's all about getting power and stuff like that. His boss fight in the 4 remake was cool. It's cool how he had 2 sword arms. The sword arm he had in the original was really awesome as well. It was very fun to use that in the Mercenaries. You could just one-shot anything. And then it was also fun to use that in RE4 remake. He had 2 sword arms. Those were fun to use as well. And he's just a fucking awesome character. Liked him in a remake. It was cool how in RE4 remake he was more of like Leon's teacher, basically. And he was just awesome in that one, that's for sure. And he was fun to use in Mercenaries. I do wish that he would have had a boss fight with Ada in separate ways in RE4 Remake. I thought that was a huge missed opportunity. I do wish Jack Krauser would have lived. He's a character that I think would be really cool to have seen in more Resident Evil games. I think he was too good to just be in one game. Now, there is a chance they could do more with him because if you play separate ways in the RE4 Remake, near the end, there's that cut scene where Wesker's on his ship and you can see Krauser on the table. Now, he could just be dead and Wesker just uses him for basically the virus since Ada didn't bring it, or he revives him and he shows up in Resident Evil 5 Remake. That would be pretty cool. Maybe we could even get Chris going up against Krauser. That would be awesome. But yeah, Krauser, that's my number 3 choice. Really cool character. Awesome Resident Evil game character. And I never got to finish or get far in the campaign with him and Leon from Darkside Chronicles, Operation Javier, because I'm not really a big fan of that gameplay style where it's like the first person shooter arcade style. I just think it's kind of odd. And also, it didn't help that he used the Wiimotes to play it. I think they should remake that campaign in over-the-shoulder, third-person style. They should have that as an expansion pack, I think, for RE4 Remake. I really want that campaign brought back with modern gameplay because there's a lot of story to tell there with Leon Krauser. But yeah, that's my number 3 choice, Krauser, aka Jack Krauser. So my number 2 choice is going to be Leon S. Kennedy. Leon is a great character from the Resident Evil game series. Definitely really do like Leon. And, he had to be on this list because I started the game franchise with him, and my favorite Resident Evil game features him, and I feel like most of the best Resident Evil games star him as well. He's a really good character. He's had really good character designs through the series, and I feel like he's had the best games. He was good in the original Resident Evil 2. He was good in Resident Evil 2 Remake. He was great in Resident Evil 4, the original. That's my favorite version of Leon of all time. He's just awesome and badass in that game. That's also my favorite voice actor of Leon, Paul Mercier. Great voice actor. He was also good in Resident Evil 4 Remake, though I do have nitpicks with his dynamic with Luis. I think he's a little bit too serious with him. He needs to be more humorous with him. I did like him in Resident Evil 6, but he was kind of a dunce in that game at times. It feels like they made him kind of an idiot at times. And to be honest, that game doesn't really hold up for me. It's not really fun to play anymore like it used to be, much like Resident Evil 5. But he was mostly good in that besides the dunce stuff. And he was good in the animated Resident Evil movies as well as Infinite Darkness, though I didn't like how in Infinite Darkness near the end he decides to not give out evidence of the government to Claire. I didn't like that. Um, but he has cool dynamic with Claire in the original RE2 and the remake. He's got cool dynamic with Ada in both versions of 2. Not a fan of his chemistry with Ada in 4 remake because of her voice actors, but he has really good dynamic with her in the original RE4. He was just badass and great in that game. Really cool character design. His back and forth with Sadler and Big Cheese and Luis Serra and Salazar was awesome. It was phenomenal. It was great. Love his character design in that game. Like I said, my favorite voice actor is his RE4 version. He just sounded so cool as voice actor. He was in his prime in that game, and just yeah. And then he was great in Resident Evil 6, besides the done stuff. And yeah, he was also good in the animated Resident Evil movies. I also liked Matthew Mercer's voice actor for him. There's not really a voice actor I didn't like that Leon had. I think he's had a good track record of voice actors, and yeah, he's a really cool character, and I do like him. And I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I could say about Leon S. Kennedy. Yeah, like I said, awesome character and definitely one of my favorites, and definitely a standout in the Resident Evil game series. And like I said, another reason I have to have him on here is because Resident Evil 4 was my first not first video game. Resident Evil 4 was my first Resident Evil game in the series, and it had him in it. And I feel like I should have him on here, not only because he's a good character, but because I started with Resident Evil 4, and I also, to this day, feel like that Resident Evil 4, the original, is still the best Resident Evil game. So he stars in the best Resident Evil game, and I feel like he has the best games. You know, he's in 2 remake, he's in RE4. Those are like some of the best Resident Evil titles, and you know, a lot of people love the original RE2, and he's in that as well. I don't think that one, the original RE2, holds up for me much. I couldn't really get into the fixed camera angle style Resident Evil games nowadays, but yeah, that's my number 2 choice, Leon S. Kennedy. Great character. Number 1 choice is going to be Albert Wesker. This is my all-time favorite Resident Evil character of all time. I think he's the best Resident Evil character. I love Albert Wesker. I love his design in all the games. The slicked back, long hair, the blonde hair to be exact, the glasses he wears all the time, the red eyes. The Stars outfit was really cool. He had the outfits in RE5 and Resident Evil 4 remake. His redesign was pretty cool in that. He's just always been such a good villain. He's like the best villain in the Resident Evil game series. You know, he doesn't care about anybody but himself. He's such a ruthless villain. He was great in Resident Evil 0, where you got to see him work with William Birkin. He was great in both RE1 original and the remake, you know, betraying Stars later on, being a leader of them. He has a lot of dynamic, a lot of characters like William Birkin, Chris, and Jill, and Barry Burton. He made Barry Burton work with him because he was going to, you know, threaten his family. And then he was great in Resident Evil 4, working behind the scenes. He had a great voice actor in there. I liked his design. He was awesome to play as in the Mercenaries of Resident Evil 4. The theme they had for him, the song that plays, was so badass and cool. He had a cool loadout in the original RE4 Mercenaries, especially the pistol with the silencer on it. I also loved him in Resident Evil 4 Remake. I think they did a phenomenal job with him. The screen time and what they did with him in separate ways was great. Back and forth with Ada was awesome. And it was so fun to play as him in Resident Evil 4 Remake Mercenaries. He had that ability where he could just run up and punch and do a whole bunch of hits on a whole bunch of enemies. He has really cool powers. You know, he could dodge bullets and do all kinds of crazy stuff in Resident Evil 5. The stuff in 5 was cool, how he, you know, brainwashed Jill and made Jill work for him. Him and Chris have this hatred for each other. He had that cool Ouroboros design near the end of the game. He had a great voice actor in Resident Evil 5, the original. That's definitely my favorite Wesker voice actor. He was great in, what was it? Resident Evil. Never mind. Resident Evil 5 was his last appearance, but he was a great villain, great character. Definitely my favorite Resident Evil character of all time. I think he's the best one just because he's the coolest, just because he's the most badass, just because he's the baddest of all the Resident Evil characters. You know, just the best villain, best character, just the absolute coolest. It was always cool to play as him. And I wish he would get his own Resident Evil game where we get it from his perspective, campaign wise, of everything he did in all the games. That would be really cool. I think he's had mostly good voice actors in the series. The one in 4 was good. The one they got recently, 4 Remake, is really cool. And then, his 1 in 5 is great. That's my favorite one. Albert Wesker was great to use in Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries. I loved his Stars loadout with the Hydra and Samurai Edge pistol. He also has a really cool Samurai Edge pistol that's just badass to use. That's like the best Samurai Edge pistol. My favorite design of his would definitely be his Resident Evil 5 Mercenary Stars outfit. I think that's his overall coolest design, in my opinion. But I do like all his character designs. So that's my number one choice, Albert Wesker. Great villain, great character. Definitely sucks he got killed off in 5 because it would have been cool to still see him in the series since he's the best villain. He does have a son, Jake Mueller, in Rari 6. He was an okay character, but he was like a one and done character. He hasn't been in any other games. But that's my top 10 Resident Evil characters, who I like the most, who my top 10 Resident Evil characters are, who my top 10 favorite Resident Evil characters are overall. Now, this is actually my third, my third version of this video because the one before this, it was mostly the same list, but Leon wasn't on it. And then the one before this, because originally this was actually going to be top 5 Resident Evil characters, but when Exlenninum did his part, it was top 10, and I was starting to think about, you know what, top 10 I think would be better to do than top 5. And, the first version only had 5 characters. And then the one before this I made, it didn't have Leon on it, and I had Parker on there. And I just felt like I had to remake it. I feel like it made more sense for Leon to be on the list because I do like him. And I started the Resident Evil game series with him. Sometimes it could be tough making top lists with characters from games. It definitely can be tough. So, some honorable mentions: Nikolai from Resident Evil 3 Remake. He was a really cool character. I liked him. Parker from Resident Evil Revelations 1. He's a really cool character. Um, let's see. Some other honorable mentions would be Josh from RE5. He was awesome. I loved his melee moves in that game. I also liked Marvin from Resident Evil 2 Remake. He was a great character. Got to give an honorable mention to him as well. I also liked Carlos in the Resident Evil 3 Remake. He was great. Another honorable mention would be Mick, Mikhail or something. Resident Evil 3 Remake. He was really cool. He looked like Bill from Left 4 Dead, just like a Russian accent, basically. Um, Tyrell was pretty cool as well. Now, somebody that I'm not really a fan of, that I probably wouldn't even mention, honorable mention, I'll talk about real quick, Jill Valentine. I've honestly never been a fan of Jill Valentine. I just never really got into her character. I just never cared for her much. I can tolerate her, she's good. And, she has good games like Revelations 1 and Resident Evil 3 Remake. And, but for the most part, I've just never been a fan of Jill. I just never really got into her as a character. That's why she wouldn't be on my list. Not even honorable mentions. I just never been a fan of Jill Valentine personally. But yeah, those are just some honorable mentions and some other characters to mention. That's it for my top 10 Resident Evil characters. Now you're going to see Dynasty Heroes talk about his top 10 Resident Evil characters, and then you're going to see Exlenninum talk about his top 10 Resident Evil characters. That's all I got to say for my part of this collab.
What's up, guys? Dynasty Heroes back again for another video. This time it's actually a collaboration with JackalGoldKick and Exlenninum. And we are all doing our top 10 Resident Evil characters. Now, Resident Evil is definitely one of my favourite video game series. Pretty much every single Resident Evil game that I've played, I've enjoyed. And a lot of the games have some very interesting, sort of well developed characters, especially sort of the main characters, but even some of the side characters are, still very interesting and entertaining. And obviously, Resident Evil is a sort of survival horror series. With a lot of those sort of series, you tend to find that the characters are a little bit sort of bare, not exactly well developed a lot of the time because they're more focusing on like the horror aspect instead of sort of to do with the characters. But I actually think Resident Evil does a pretty good job at sort of balancing, all of the things like the horror element, the actual characters, the gameplay. So yeah, I do think the Resident Evil series is, definitely up there as one of the best. And to be honest with you, you know it's changed directions over the years, but I still think that it's still going really well. Now, I haven't actually played all of the games. I'm kind of a little bit behind with the games. Like I haven't really played like Resident Evil 7. I haven't played Village. I haven't played the 3 remake. I haven't played the 4 remake. But I've played a pretty good amount, pretty decent amount of the games in the series. So I know a lot about characters and all of that. So it's not really a problem. Now, as I said, we're doing our top 10 characters. Now, that's top 10 spots. It's not necessarily top 10 characters, as you'll sort of find out as I go through my list, because there's going to be more than 10 characters, and there is a reason for that. Because one of the spots, especially, I couldn't sort of do it individually because the list wouldn't work otherwise. But anyway, let's get on with the list. So, number 10, just making it onto the list, is Ada Wong. Now, straight away, we're already a little bit controversial because I'm putting Ada sort of right at the bottom of my list. And from what I've seen, Ada's actually quite a popular Resident Evil character. I personally don't mind her, but again, she's not necessarily involved enough to really make a huge impact, at least in my opinion, because obviously she first appeared in Resident Evil 2, then she returned in 4, then she returned again in 6, and I do sort of like her character, but I think what kind of hurts it for me is that I'm not really a fan of Leon either. And obviously, Ada only appears in the games where Leon's in, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what hurts it for me. But I do think she's interesting with her background. She's like a sort of double agent, and you never know where her allegiances really are. Sort of with Umbrella, or you know, is she really sort of on Leon's side, or is she sort of in between? She or is she just really out for herself? It's a sort of interesting dynamic. So Ada is I do like her character. She's very complex, and I do appreciate that. So yeah. So at number 9, we got Leon Scott Kennedy, who I was talking about with Ada. So again, another very controversial one, probably the most controversial on the list. Yes, to be honest with you, Leon is lucky to even be on the list. I'll be honest. Okay, I know people really liked Leon because obviously, his first game was Resident Evil 2. Everyone really likes Resident Evil 2. Then it was Resident Evil 4. Pretty much everybody loves Resident Evil 4. A lot of the people consider it to be the best Resident Evil game. And then obviously again returns in Resident Evil 6. So yeah, Leon. See, I do like Leon, but I mainly prefer him in Resident Evil 2. If that makes sense, I'm not a massive fan of his personality in Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 2, obviously he's a cop in Raccoon City, sort of new. He's a new cop. His first day on the job, Raccoon City incident happens, but he manages to get through it. And then in Resident Evil 4, he's working for the government as an agent. And then in Resident Evil 6, same sort of thing. Again, he's still working for the government. But the problem is, in Resident Evil 4, his personality really comes across as cocky and arrogant. And I don't really like that. I can understand why his character is a bit like that. I'm assuming it's because obviously after the events of Resident Evil 2, that really hardened him, and obviously he had a lot of training and everything, so he was a lot more skilled and sort of a lot more combat, trained. So I can kind of see why he's a little bit cocky, but it kind of rubs me the wrong way. And a lot of people would consider Leon to be the main character of the Resident Evil series. I don't agree with that. Although he is in, a decent amount of the mainline games, I'm not necessarily sure I think I would class him as the main character of the series. I don't agree with that. So, number 7, Billy Cohen. So, Billy is a very interesting character. Obviously, his first and only appearance is in Resident Evil 0, and that's what makes him so interesting. He only ever appears in one game, even though he's not killed off. So, theoretically speaking, he could appear in a new Resident Evil game if they wrote him into the story again. But he has, and that's, I don't know if that helps his character or hurts it. I suppose in one way it kind of makes his character a lot more interesting because he's literally in one game and that's it. A lot more mysterious in that way. And his game that he appears in is set right at the beginning of the entire timeline. It's set, Resident Evil 0. It's set before Resident Evil 1 even happens. So it's kind of crazy that basically he appears in, the very first sort of game set in the timeline, never appears again. People have got a lot of theories, about why he hasn't necessarily appeared in another game, or is it possible he has, but under a different, identity? That's another thing that kind of makes his character a lot more interesting. Now, obviously, Resident Evil 0, he's paired up with Rebecca Chambers. Their chemistry in the game is quite good. And obviously, he was previously in the army, but something goes wrong, and he kind of gets framed for something he didn't even do. So he's actually a good guy. But yeah, he's a likable character. Now the theories as to why he hasn't appeared again. Some people theorize he is dead, but he was killed sort of, off screen. Um, some people theorize that he, ended up getting killed in the forest. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because he is pretty experienced in combat and everything. The other theory is that he has actually appeared in other games but under a different identity. That's an interesting one. Some people theorize he could have been like captured and like brainwashed possibly, or he could have been like experimented on. Maybe he could have been turned into one of the monsters in one of the games. That's the interesting thing. We don't necessarily know where what's going on with him. So I do think that's pretty cool. So at number 7, yep, number 7, we have. Now this is the one where this is what I meant about like there not only being 10 characters. So at number 7 on the list is the rest of stars. Now this is a kind of weird take on my part. So I really like the first game, and obviously there's the whole thing where the members of Stars go to the mansion to investigate it, and obviously pretty much everyone in that game is a member of Stars, and I really just like the whole unit. I like the whole point of them. Like Stars are meant to be the elite of the elite in Raccoon City. And I kind of wish we'd got more with them because they don't realistically, Stars is only around for one game. Realistically, the first one. After that, they kind of get disbanded, and obviously other members join up and become members of the BSAA. But Stars itself is only really in one game. So yeah, the rest of Stars, I'm going to list them off because I wouldn't have. There's no way I was going to remember all their names. So we got Brad Vickers, who it was the pilot for Alpha Team. Then we got Joseph Frost, who was a member of Bravo Team, and then he got promoted into Alpha Team. We got Enrico Marini, who is the head of Bravo Team. Then we got Kenneth J. Sullivan, Richard Eichen, Forrest Speyer, Edward Dewey. Now, there's also Kevin Dooley, but he's not technically a member of Stars. He was a part of the RPD, but he did act as the Bravo Team helicopter pilot, mainly. But there was another. Edward Dewey was also a pilot as well, so I don't quite know why they had Kevin, but for some reason they did. And sort of an honourable mention, another one, Kevin Ryman, who is one of the characters from the Resident Evil Outbreak games. He was an officer for the RPD, and he actually did try out to join Stars, but he tried out twice and failed both times. But the cool thing about him is that he's another one very, very well combat, trained. Apparently, he won like a marksman contest, um, the same as Chris and Forrest. So clearly a very well, he's clearly very sort of strong. But apparently, the reason that he didn't get into Stars was because he was a little bit relaxed and laid back. So he was a cool character as well. But yeah, those that's what I want. I wanted to really name the rest of the Stars members that obviously are sort of not really focused on it all in the game, unfortunately, because obviously most of them end up dead by the end of the first game anyway. And I think it's kind of a little bit of a wasted opportunity because I feel like they could have kept some of the other Stars members around. Maybe. See, this is my thing that I would love. So apparently they're remaking Resident Evil 1 again. Now, here's something I would find quite interesting. I would quite enjoy them if they did. I think you should potentially be able to save some of the other Stars members in the game. I think that would be really cool, because you could do a little bit more with them. You could flesh them out a little bit more, and I think it would actually make it a lot more interesting. There's definitely some of them you can definitely work with a little bit easier. Another thing I didn't realize is there are actually some of them that are playable in Resident Evil Deadly Silence, which is like the PlayStation 1, not the PlayStation 1, the Nintendo DS version of the PlayStation 1 Resident Evil 1. That's really awesome. I only found out a couple of days ago that some of the members are actually playable in the DS game for some reason, so that's quite cool. So yeah, I think maybe they should make it so you can possibly save some of the members if you do certain things in the game. I think that'd be really interesting. And there's definitely some of the members that you can flesh out a little bit more. I mean, some of them obviously die quite quickly. You probably can't do so much with them. People like Kenneth, the pilots like Edward and Kevin. Okay, you might not be able to necessarily do a lot with them, but definitely people like Richard, Forrest, Enrico. I definitely think you could do stuff with them. Because obviously Richard is still alive when you get to the mansion. So's Enrico. Forrest isn't, but Forrest is another weird one because Forrest is seemingly just as skillful as Chris, and yet he's dead as well. It's very weird. Like I feel like Forrest should have, from the impression that I get, Forrest probably should have been able to survive. So I feel like maybe if we could like expand on them more, I think that would be really awesome for the game. So yeah, the rest of Stars and obviously Kevin from Outbreak, I think they are quite cool characters. So yeah. So number 6 is going to be Claire Redfield. Again, I think for a lot of people, Claire would be very high up on their list, possibly in the top 3, maybe. I don't know. Um, Claire Redfield, obviously sister to Chris Redfield. First appearance, Resident Evil 2, along with Leon. And then obviously she appears in Resident Evil Code Veronica, where she's the main character, along with Chris. And then obviously she comes back in Revelations 2. I do like Claire as a character, to be fair. She is likable. And obviously her relationship with Chris helps with that. But she's a little. I mean, okay, so not in the games necessarily, but in like the animated sort of movies, I don't think it helps necessarily portrays her amazingly because she kind of becomes a little bit of she becomes very idealistic with her views and is very. I can't really think of the word, but she's very skeptical about things, and she acts a bit righteous sometimes. But I do actually like her as a character in the games. Um, she does, she comes across quite cool. And the games that she's in as well, I like them. Resident Evil 2, great game. Code Veronica, I haven't. That's one of the games I haven't finished, but from what I've played of it, I did enjoy it. Revelations 2 was also a great game. It's definitely one of the more interesting games. Um, but yeah, Claire's an awesome character. So now we are into our top 5. Just making it into the top 5 is Rebecca Chambers. So obviously Rebecca's first game that she's in is Resident Evil 1. And then obviously she has her own game with Billy, Resident Evil 0, the prequel. I do like Rebecca as a character. She hasn't appeared in as many games as some of the other characters because pretty much the only games that she actually appears in is 1 and 0. After that, she doesn't really appear. In fact, if anything, she appears in the movies, the animated movies, more than the games, which is kind of weird, but there you go. So yeah, Rebecca was a member of Bravo Team, Star's Bravo Team, and she's actually the only one that survives out of all of them. So yeah, but she's a likable character. Um, she definitely, I mean, it's a bit weird because in Resident Evil 1, she's a little bit sort of not really like combat oriented, which is a bit weird because then it kind of contradicts Resident Evil 0 because obviously she's gone through a lot of stuff in Resident Evil 0 and then she goes to the mansion in Resident Evil 1 and it's almost like she didn't go through anything that happened in Resident Evil 0, and that's obviously because Resident Evil 0 came out after Resident Evil 1 did. But I still do like her as a character, and obviously after the events of Resident Evil 1, she's more of a scientist, but she also works in conjunction with the BSAA and helps out Chris and everything. But yeah, she's a cool character. So At number 4, we've got Hunk. Now, I bet Hunk. I can't imagine many people would be putting Hunk on like their top Resident Evil characters list, but I have. I really like Hunk as a character, even though there's not really a lot to him, and that's another thing. That's another kind of thing that appeals to me. Arguably the most mysterious Resident Evil character, actually, because we don't even know what his real name or identity is. So Hunk actually is an acronym, and it stands for Human Unit Never Killed. And he also goes by a whole bunch of other nicknames: Mr. Death, the Grim Reaper, awesome nicknames, let's be honest. So he's basically works for Umbrella. He was a member of like the special Umbrella Ops during the events of Resident Evil 2 in Raccoon City to get the T virus. Is it the T virus? I think it's the virus in Resident Evil 2 off of William Birkin. So he goes in with his unit to get the virus, and obviously things go horribly wrong. You know, William Birkin injects himself, mutates, basically kills pretty much nearly all of the Umbrella special ops except for Hunk. Hunk's the only one, pretty much the only one that makes it out. And that's pretty much how, that's the crazy thing. Like, he always survives. He pretty much always completes his mission. He always survives. He's crazy. It's crazy. He's like the most efficient character. He's arguably like the most trained out of everybody. Like, I would probably argue, to be honest with you, there's only a couple of people in Resident Evil that are stronger than him, and even then, we don't know. Realistically speaking, he could be the strongest out of everybody because you don't ever, he's still going. He survives one of the like most difficult missions, and yeah, I just find it interesting because he's such a mysterious character. He's not even in the main stories. That's the crazy thing. He's in a extra mode for Resident Evil 2, and then he basically only appears in non-canon mini games like Mercenaries, and that's it. That's all we get with him. He doesn't really appear in the story ever again. Very, very mysterious character. We don't really know a lot about him at all. But I do find him really awesome. So that's why he makes the list. So, in third spot, we have Barry Burton. Obviously, first appearing in Resident Evil 1, and then he makes a brief cameo in the original Resident Evil 3, and then we pretty much get nothing from him until Resident Evil Revelations 2, where, for the first time, he's a playable character. He's actually the main character of the game, sort of along with Claire Redfield. And Barry, obviously, member of STAR's Alpha Team. Before that, he was in the US Air Force, along with Chris, and that's how they met, and that's how sort of Chris and all that joined STARS. So very cool backstory with them guys. And obviously Barry, Resident Evil 1, very important part of the story realistically, because it turns out he's been blackmailed by Wesker to sort of act as he's a little bit of a he's kind of helping sabotage STARS. And obviously he does that because Wesker threatens his family, so that's understandable on Barry's part. Barry can't really do a whole lot. But the other cool thing is Barry kind of arms the STARS team. Barry's Barry is friends with Kendo, who owns the gun shop in Raccoon City, so he kind of gets the firearms for Stars. He's got his classic, Magnum in the games. Barry's just a very cool character. And obviously in Resident Evil Revelations 2, his backstory is greatly expanded on his history with his daughter Moira in the game. So it's great that Barry finally did get a game where he was playable and his story was developed. I definitely appreciated that because Barry is definitely one of my favorite Resident Evil characters. I think he is quite underrated and, to be honest with you, underused as well because he doesn't really appear in many of the games and it's a shame. So yeah, number 2 spot, we've just been talking about him, Albert Wesker, the main villain of the Resident Evil series, realistically speaking, in my opinion. He's obviously the leader of Stars in Resident Evil 1, and it turns out he's pretty much behind the events of Resident Evil 1, although there's other people also in the background that are kind of involved, like William Birkin and, you know, Spencer. But Wesker is pretty much the main thing behind it. Obviously, experimenting with the virus, creating Tyrant and stuff. And it's kind of a shock, especially if you don't know beforehand. You're playing the game. Wesker's there. Okay, he's a bit. He comes off a little bit weird, but obviously you wouldn't. He's a member of the team, so you don't think anything of it. But he's the captain. And then as the game goes on, you get suspicious, and then it turns out obviously that he's basically responsible. I mean, he's the leader of Stars. He brought them there, kind of almost as a test to see how effective his creation, his experiments were. And obviously, he worked. He was a scientist at Umbrella and everything, and he's a technically he himself is an experiment. The Wesker children. That's why he's probably so smart and strong as well. And obviously, it turns out at the end of the game, his creation Tyrant turns against him, attacks him, supposedly kills him. But then you find out that Wesker injected himself with a virus that saved him. And then he gets crazy powers afterwards, from it. And then he obviously appears in Code Veronica, Resident Evil 5, where he has a little cameo in Resident Evil 4, but his main appearances in Resident Evil 5, where he comes back again. He's created his new corporation, Tricell, and all that crazy stuff. He's like got Jill brainwashed under his control, and he wants to unleash a new Ouroboros virus worldwide and everything. And Wesker is just the best villain in Resident Evil, easily. I definitely think. That's why it's kind of a shame that they killed him off in Resident Evil 5 because he was too good of a villain to kill off. I really do think that. I mean, maybe they should have at least kept him around for another couple of games, maybe. But that's not how it went down. But I do think he's a great villain, great character as well. He's an actual threat. Like he's not just one of those. He's not just like a dumb villain as well either. He's like extremely intelligent. He's probably he's probably the most intelligent character possibly in the series. to be honest. Like he's arguably the most intelligent and possibly also one of the strongest. So he's a massive threat. And obviously, his whole and the fact that his backstory is there throughout the game is helps it a lot because he was the leader of stars. He betrays them, and the whole story goes on from there. With Chris, with Jill, with Barry, the backstory, all of them are connected through the Resident Evil 1 mansion incident, and it goes from there. And then obviously that's the problem that obviously after Resident Evil 5, where they kill off Wesker, the link is broken almost between the characters because Wesker was a thing that connected them all with stars, and that's why I feel it kind of hurt the series as well because when Wesker was around, it was personal for all of them that he was involved and responsible. So yeah, great villain, great character. Okay, number one spot. Now again, I'm cheating a little bit, but number one is joint number one. Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine. I couldn't split them up. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't put one, um, above the other one. To be honest with you, in terms of my favourite, because I kind of like them equally. Obviously, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, the two playable characters in the first Resident Evil game, both members of STAR's Alpha team. Chris Redfield, obviously, uh, was originally in the Air Force, same as Barry. And Jill, obviously joined STARS as well as a member of the Alpha team. Great chemistry between them in a lot of the games going forward. Obviously, after Resident Evil 1, obviously Chris, Jill, obviously main character in Resident Evil 3. Chris was obviously the other main character in Code Veronica, and then Chris comes back as the main character in Resident Evil 5. Chris is also in Resident Evil 6, and he's also in the DLC for Resident Evil 7. He appears in Resident Evil 8 Village. So, and obviously Chris and Jill in Revelations 1 as well. So, Chris has been in the most Resident Evil games. Jill has been in a lot of the Resident Evil games. Not as many as I would like. I think she's definitely, unfortunately, been underutilized as well. I think she definitely should have been in a few more of the games. But yeah, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, in my opinion, they are the main characters of Resident Evil. Not Leon, not Claire. In my opinion, Chris and Jill are the main characters. As I said, I love their chemistry in the games. They get along well. They're partners in STARS and also the BSAA. Chris and Jill are actually some of the founding members of the BSAA, which is really awesome as well. And I just really enjoy their characters. There's even, this is a little bit more fan fiction and sort of fan theory and speculation. It hasn't been confirmed in any of the games or any of the other, in any other media like the film, movies, or anything, or comics. There is allegedly hints that Chris and Jill are romantically involved. The chemistry is definitely there with them, and especially in Resident Evil Revelations 1, they there's hints throughout the game pointing in that direction. And obviously Resident Evil 5 is another one where it's a little bit more subtle, but it's there as well. Whether or not they would ever mention it and confirm it in one of the games, I'm not so sure they would. It'd be cool if they did. I'm not against it, to be honest with you. I think it would be pretty awesome if they actually did mention it. It would be cool if they were, because they're still very professional, though. You know, if it doesn't get in the way of their mission, if they are, and that's very awesome. But anyway, guys, that's my list of my top 10 Resident Evil characters. Obviously, I did include more than 10 actual characters for the reasons that obviously, in the video, I obviously wanted to mention the rest of the Stars team who didn't get their individual, rankings. And obviously, for the number one spot, is a joint spot between Chris and Jill. But yeah, as I said at the beginning of the video, though, Resident Evil is an absolutely amazing video game series. One of my favourites. Great characters. The gameplay in them is very fun. There's not a single one, to be honest with you, that I've played that I haven't enjoyed. And that says a lot. And the Resident Evil series has been going on for a long time. A lot of games, and there's not one that I've played that I haven't really enjoyed. Obviously, there are some more controversial games that's not to everyone's liking, but for the most part, all of them are pretty much very high quality games, and I'm looking forward to the continuation of the series in the future. I've still got, quite a few of the games to play. I really do want to get around to playing them, because I have a feeling they're all very good. But anyway, guys, that's the end of the video. As I said, again, this was a collaboration with JackalGoldKick and Exlenninum. Yeah, guys, as always, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys on the next video. See you later, guys.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, my Empirees. Exlenninum is back in the house once again. Now, you all noticed that I'm actually doing this with my audio, with my microphone, without recording myself. There's nothing wrong with my webcam. My webcam just works very well. I just decided to choose to record and make a video this way without any footage. Well, actually, there will be footage. What I meant by footage is that I usually record myself talking, but this time I'm not recording myself talking. This video was requested by a good friend of mine by the name of JackalGoldKick. His channel will be linked down in the description. Tell him Exlenninum sent him over there. Now, for not wasting any time, this is my top 10 favorite RE characters. But before I do that, let me just get to my honorable mentions first. And I have 4 honorable mentions right here. So let's just get started with the first one by the name of Barry Burton. He is a member of the Stars group. I believe it was the Alpha team, because I remember the Bravo team, he wasn't there. Barry was in a few games such as Resident Evil HD Remaster, including a playable character in Resident Evil Revelations 2. My second one is William Birkin. He is a scientist, an evil scientist from both Resident Evil 2, the original, and Resident Evil 2, the remake. The father of Sherry Birkin. He ejected himself to become this big badass monster with a pipe as the weapon, and also he could transform into a giant including with like claws in his hands. My third honorable mention, and some of you people might be shocked for him being in this list, is Marvin Branagh. I can't pronounce his name. I'm just going to call him Sheriff Marvin from both Resident Evil 2, the original, and Resident Evil 2, the remake. This is an officer who saved both Leon or Claire, whatever character you're playing, and he was giving them information that the Raccoon Police Department is no joke, and they're like full of zombies and lickers. So even though he was not too much part of the game, but he was a huge help to those two in the beginning of the game. So props to him. And my last and final honorable mention, and this was very, very close, but for my honorable mention, I have to put with Sheva Alomar. Sheva Alomar appears in Resident Evil 5, which, in case some of you people didn't know, I did a Resident Evil 5 walkthrough from both Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar. She is probably Chris Redfield's best sidekick. I believe she's a better sidekick with on Chris' side than it is on Jill. Sorry, no disrespect to Jill. I know Jill Valentine is one of the best RE characters, but when it comes to RE5 and not only the entire Resident Evil series, Sheva Alomar is a better sidekick than Jill Valentine. And I know I'm going to get a lot of backlash for me for saying that, but that's just my honest opinion. So those are my honorable mentions. Now, no time to waste. Here is my top 10 Resident Evil characters. So starting at number 10, and this person, you only see him one time, just like Sheva from RE5. But it was close between Sheva or this individual to put my number 10. But since Sheva is in my honorable mentions, coming number 10 is Billy Cohen. Now, Billy Cohen only appears one time, and that is Resident Evil 0. This dude was an ex-prisoner. Well, he was actually a prisoner, but then he got loose. But during his escape, officers were trying to find Billy before they got killed by the virus. So Billy Cohen just hid in this train before he met up with Rebecca Chambers. I don't see no other RE character bust out of prison like Billy Cohen is. So Billy Cohen is number 10. Number 9, Rebecca Chambers. Rookie from Bravo team, youngest member of them all. She's a sole survivor and she's a fighter. I mean, you gotta give her props. No 18-year-old will probably go through all that in a train, including the mansion, for like the first 48 hours like she did in Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil HD Remaster. Number 8, and this is probably one of the most scariest villains in the entire game, and that is Jack Baker from Resident Evil 7. Holy cow, that this dude is so scary. Like, he is, like, not only he's like horrifying, but he could be a little funny here and there with the jokes, you know, but whenever you try to avoid him, he just comes after you. Not as bad as Nemesis, but still, you know, like pretty badass in his own way, especially, you know, in the Baker's house. Number 7, and this is a very controversial one because a lot of people put this high on the list. But coming in number 7 is Jill Valentine. Like, she is a member of STARS. She's like in a lot of different games like Resident Evil HD Remaster, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, both classic and the remake. Also in Resident Evil Revelations, one of my favorite Resident Evil games of all time. The master of the pick lock, and she's a trained member from STARS. The one, I want to say negative, but the one thing that she's on number 7 because the rest on top hit a little bit harder. Coming number 6 is Claire Redfield. Now the reason why I put Claire Redfield on top of Jill Valentine because she is not a member from STAR. She's just a regular person just looking for her brother Chris Redfield. Which that makes that person, Claire, a complete badass. And when you start her in the game, she gets all those kind of weapons like bazooka, machine guns, flamethrowers, which Jill or even Leon Kennedy don't have that stuff. Like, what the hell? But Claire was in a couple of video games like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Resident Evil Code Veronica X. Even the regular Code Veronica from the Dreamcast, which that's exactly the same game. But yeah, Claire Redfield, she's on number 6. I believe she's one of the best characters of all time. So that's just my honest opinion right there. Number 5 is Albert Wesker. Yes, one of the main bosses from the Resident Evil franchise. The dude, he's like a mastermind. It was him all along from Resident Evil HD Remaster, even the original one, that he created the Tyrant, who is one of the most responsible for causing all this chaos that has happened in Raccoon City. Also in the movies, he was great as well. But not as good as my number 4, because coming number 4 is Ada Wong. I believe Ada Wong is more of a badass than Albert Wesker, especially in Resident Evil 4 when you play as Ada in separate ways. I mean, she knows what she's doing, and Albert Wesker is using Ada, but I don't think Albert realized that Ada is actually using him, so she could turn on him at the last moment. That's what Ada would do. I mean, she is probably the best spy in the entire game, and she's just as sneaky as Albert Wesker. That's why I put Ada over on Albert. So Ada Wong is on number 4. Number 3 is the big bad Nemesis. Because every time you go fight the Nemesis, he always comes back and look for vengeance, no matter what. Especially chasing Jill Valentine all over the city. I mean, when you go to the RPD station, there's Nemesis. When you go on the street, there's Nemesis. Wherever you go to the clock tower, there's Nemesis. Wherever you go to the hospital, there's Nemesis. Wherever you go to the park, there's Nemesis. Wherever you spend time in your grandma's house, there's Nemesis. Well, the grandma house is not really having, but I'm saying for example. So, Nemesis, he's just one big mofo. I mean, you can't underestimate him. In fact, he's just as dangerous as both the Tyrant, William Birkin, and he's just as dangerous than Jack Baker, in my honest opinion. He's bigger and badder. I mean, I know Jack Baker could be insane, but not compared to the Nemesis. Oh, no. So props to Nemesis right there. So Nemesis, number 3. All right, then. Hands clapping. Top 2. Top 2 left. These are the top 2 main characters. And this is a very difficult decision, but coming in number 2, I gotta go with Chris Redfield, the brother of Claire Redfield. Now, Chris is an OG character from the Resident Evil series. He's been through a lot of games. Resident Evil HD Remaster, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil Village, which is 8. Even though, and he was in Resident Evil 7 as well, but only in the last part of the game, which that's my least favorite Chris. Out of all the Chris Redfield characters, my favorite Chris is Resident Evil 5 because of how big, buff, and jacked up he is. That is my favorite Chris Redfield right there. I know most favorite Chris Redfield is, was it HD Remaster? No, Resident Evil 6. Oh, I totally forgot Resident Evil 6. Yes, he was also Resident Evil 6 too. They say that Chris Redfield in Resident Evil 6 is the best one. I think so, but I actually like Resident Evil 5 Chris Redfield better because the muscles. Now he reminds me of Arnold Schwarzenegger, how buff he is. So even though most people like Resident Evil 6 Chris better, but my honest opinion, I think Resident Evil 5 Chris is just as badass than all the other Chris's characters. But in number 1, I gotta go to my homeboy Leon Kennedy from Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, and Resident Evil 6. 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do you appreciate? Leon. But I gotta say, Chris Redfield, he's a badass too. But Leon Kennedy, he's my number one. He's always been like the favorite in the Resident Evil franchise. I mean, he just got more mature over the years, especially from 2 to 4. I mean, Resident Evil 4, that's how he started it all. But Resident Evil 6, he improved a lot, in my opinion. But Resident Evil 4, that is the most badass Leon Kennedy character ever. And I see why a lot of people put Leon Kennedy over Chris Redfield. I know Chris Redfield is an amazing character, but if it wasn't for Leon, probably Resident Evil wouldn't have been this popular in the first place. That is why I have Leon Kennedy as my number one. So that is my top 10 best RE characters, including my honorable mentions. Tell me your thoughts in the comment section. Who is your favorite RE characters? This is Exlenninum. Again, shouts to JackalGoldKick. Rate, comment, share, subscribe, hit notification. Peace out. Have a great day and evening, everyone. And before I end this video, I just want to inform each and every one of you that I'm going to be doing a webcam test soon. Have a great day and night, folks. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.